Hello and welcome to this edition of Hardman Talks. My name is Jason Streets, one of the team of analysts at Hardman Co, and I'm joined today by Keith Hiscock, the Chief Executive of Hardman. Keith has spent 46 years working in the stock market. It's great to see you still alive, Keith, and to have you here today.
Thank you very much.
Now, you've just published a paper entitled Economic Growth, Crimea River. Why have you written about growth?
Okay, so the word growth is bandied around all the time by politicians, the press and the markets, often with little thought. The Labour Party manifesto for the last general election last year talked about our plan to change Britain and devoted an entire chapter to kickstart economic growth. Yet in the 136 pages of that manifesto, I can't find any definition whatsoever of what growth is. But generally, growth, the good things about growth are they lead to higher standards of living, more money is generated for the state in taxes to spend on what they think are good causes. Growth as a term is also used as a kind of measuring stick. You know, how's the UK doing compared to the US or Europe, for example? There are lots of ways to measure it. This isn't really a paper to talk about those basic macroeconomic lessons, but it's an attempt to explain the use of the term and some of the issues around it.
Okay then, so what do we mean by growth?
Well, generally by growth, we mean the increase in the aggregate gross domestic product of a country. That's effectively all of the output of all the goods and services of a country in a year. There are different ways to measure it, as I say. Politicians often make the mistake of talking about current spending to generate more growth as investment. Well, in fact, what they mean is current spending. We've got more nurses, we've got more doctors. That isn't growth. That's just more current spending. So there's a mistake there in the terminology that I correct.
So what would you say was the right measure? Is it aggregate GDP?
So aggregate GDP is a way of comparing the total size of an economy. And for example, there's quite a lot of academic work that suggests that the bigger the economy, the more likely you are to win a war against an economy with a lower GDP. So it's a good measure of a country's economic heft. There are those who argue that we should instead measure happiness, because isn't that what growth is trying to achieve? And on the face of it, that's appealing as a concept. The problem is, how do you measure it? What do you include? How do you weight things? Because what I think is important to my happiness might not be important to yours, Jason. So they always end up being a bit of a mishmash. A counter argument is to say, well, we're worried about the impact on the environment, and maybe we don't want so much growth. The next issue is, how's it distributed? Because although we could have an enormous GDP, how does that translate into GDP per capita? So broadly, India and the UK's GDP in aggregate is pretty well the same. There's about a 10% difference between them. But obviously per capita, given the size of the Indian population, it's much lower. So standards of living on average are much lower in India. People also then worry about the distribution of it, because it could be all in the hands of very few people, or it could be very well distributed. So in that sense, people, some commentators would say looking at the aggregate is misleading. It depends on what you're trying to use it for. Generally, when people talk about growth, it's growth in aggregate GDP.
And what do you see as the critical elements required for growth?
Well, there's lots of talk about investment in infrastructure, etc. But I think there are two things that we're really missing out on at the moment. And one is entrepreneurs, individuals who take the risk everything to pursue creating a company, growing a business. In Victorian times, they were celebrated, men like Henry Bessemer, who invented the process for producing steel and essentially was the founder of Sheffield, steel city of the time. Men like that were celebrated in Victorian times. Today, I would suggest it's the other way around. They're denigrated, and the term profit, which is the reward you get for having got your enterprise right, is considered by many people just to be a dirty word. So I think changing the attitude to entrepreneurs and enterprise is critical to having a growth society. I mean, that's why one of the reasons the US is such a successful growing economy. And the second issue, the second element, I think, which I haven't seen talked about recently, is the free flow of capital. So if you think back to the first industrial revolution, one of the reasons that happened was that capital was released from the agrarian economy by various changes in methodologies, etc., that released capital as well as labour. And that free flow of capital then enables new businesses to come along to get access to the capital to grow and to scale up. In an economy where that doesn't happen, you end up clogging capital in the hands of companies that don't actually need it, and starving those that do need it of that kind of vital lifeblood. And in the article, I talk about one example, which is British American Tobacco, a very successful global tobacco company, very cash generative, and in the past tried to deploy that surplus capital itself into things like retailing. So it bought Argos, it bought Saks Fifth Avenue, or into financial services. It owned Eagle Star. And you might say, well, what does tobacco management know about those things? And the answer is probably not very much. And I think most shareholders would have preferred the money to have been given back to them so that they can decide where that money should be deployed. Without that free flow of capital, you get inefficient allocation of capital. And what stops the free flow of capital? Taxes on dividends, taxes on capital gains. People stick with their existing holdings because as a consequence, they lose some of the money if they sell it potentially. Now, obviously, there's an argument that says, well, if you didn't do that, then people would turn income into capital gains or dividends. And I buy some of that, but I've not heard any consideration of the other issue, which is, well, part of the cost of doing that is you gum up the flow of capital, which is essential to new growing, scaling up businesses.
So how do you see the current track record of our new Labour government being in power a year or so now?
Well, for a government that professes that its number one priority is growth, I'm afraid the data's not been very supportive. So we've had 11 months of data on GDP from the Office for National Statistics. And in 3 of those months, GDP went backwards. In 2 of them, it was unchanged. And in just 6 did it rise. And in aggregate, over the first 11 months, it's 1%. Now, obviously, a government. So first of all, these numbers, some of these numbers are provisional, so they may change. So let's not get hung up on that. Secondly, you couldn't expect the economy to respond to what the Labour government might do within the first month or 2. So we'll give them some benefit for that. And you could also argue that GDP growth should be thought of as a marathon and not a sprint. But at the moment, I think if you drew a line today, you'd say, well, you haven't achieved growth. And in fact, some of the measures you've introduced, particularly around national insurance changes on employers, have done the opposite.
So what do you think can be done to boost growth then?
Well, I think there are 2 key things, and I sort of already mentioned them. One is to change the culture around entrepreneurs and to celebrate their success. And part of that means that they can keep more of their money. And the second thing is to accelerate the flow of capital. And I'm suggesting that we maybe think about more tax wrappers. So the ISA scheme, stocks and shares ISA, is a tax wrapper. So long as you keep your money in the scheme, you can sell and buy stocks free of capital gains tax, so you don't have some of it taken away. Obviously, when you take the money out, you don't suffer capital gains tax, but you lose that tax benefit. And I wonder whether we should think about applying a tax wrapper more generally that says, well, if I sell shares in company A and then reinvest the money within, let's say, 30 days, I don't pay capital gains tax. And only when I take net money out do I pay capital gains tax. Now, I don't think any government's going to agree to that anytime soon, but that's one of the approaches that would free the flow of capital and make it easier for businesses that need it to get access to capital and enable companies that are generating cash, don't need any more capital, to effectively release it.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Keith, for your time. You can view Keith's paper on growth for free on our website, hardmanco.com. As always, thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like this video, join in the conversation wherever you're watching. And if you've watched to this far, I'm sure you'll be looking forward to the next one.